Welcome to the Week 10 Sharp Football Show. We're going to dive into a number of things that we saw from Week 9, look ahead to Week 10, break some games down, look at it from an analytical perspective, and hopefully share some insights that you maybe haven't heard of as of this point in time. But before we do that, definitely want to get into just a brutal day for a lot of sports bettors yesterday. As you can see here, NFL teams getting the majority of spread bets went a perfect 11-0 ATS and straight up on Sunday. I myself had probably the worst day that I've had in a number of years. I only had one total, but I was on a number of these unliked, unwanted underdogs that were not getting much love, that were outclassed in terms of quarterback, and just did not cover against the spread. And sportsbooks are saying that this is one of the worst days, NFL Sundays, that they have seen in well over 5 years. It really was brutal for the books. And when it's bad for the books, generally speaking, it's bad for the sharper betting groups and the sharper bettors who are oftentimes aligning against the public. They're aligning on the teams that are the worst teams with the worst quarterbacks who are taking extra points and who the public is going against. Therefore, there's a little bit of extra line value on those teams. And of course, I was definitely in that boat yesterday. Horrible day. And so hopefully we're looking to turn things around starting this upcoming week. And with that, let's start breaking down how some of these teams failed to cover or some of these teams were able to do so. And in this case, let's first start by talking about the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens, 64% success rate on running back runs. In the entirety of the game, they had a 64% success rate on running back runs. Yet Joe Flacco was 28 of 47 for only 5.7 yards per attempt, a 36% success rate, and a 77.6 passer rating. This team, the game was pretty close throughout. There were certain points in time where they were down by just over one score, but they would always pretty much score within like 3 or 4 minutes and bring that back up to a one-score game. And despite the fact that they had such success with running back runs, and I'm using the phrase running back runs because Lamar Jackson really had a bad day, but the running backs, although their yards per carry weren't tremendously high, they were extremely successful running the football, as you can see, 64%. Yet the Baltimore Ravens go 71% pass. Now, on early downs, they were 70% pass over the course of the game. On early downs in the first quarter, it's not as if like they got stymied early and they needed to all of a sudden switch and go pass heavy. They were not stymied early. The game was close early. They actually took a lead in this game by a field goal. And early down runs in the first quarter from running backs, 50% success rate, and they averaged 5.3 yards per carry. So they were getting production out of their running backs on early downs in the first quarter. But one of the big things, as I kind of alluded to, Lamar Jackson, only 2 yards per carry and a 20% success rate. A very bad day for the kind of the trickeration or the other sub packages that they would utilize by bringing Lamar Jackson in and trying to do other things with him on the ground against the Steelers. An interesting thing about the Steelers, through week 9, so through the game that was just played, the Steelers have played 5 of 6 games within the AFC North. They went 3-1-1 in those 5 games. The last game they have is against the Bengals, week 17 in Pittsburgh. So the Pittsburgh Steelers have already, a lot of time the NFL over the last several years talked about backloading the schedules, talked about putting a lot of division games that matter at the end of the schedule to try to make things a little bit more compelling. Well, that's definitely not the case in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, they're almost done with their division schedule, and they obviously have a very good record against the Cincinnati Bengals. They get to play them week 17 at home. We'll see how things go. I don't think they're going to run away with anything given their current record to the point where they may not need to play anybody, but they may not be like guaranteed, those top 2 seeds, right? With the way that New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs are playing, those 2 teams legitimately could be sitting at 14-2. Both of them have locked up the first round bye. So there could potentially be something that the Steelers would be playing for in week 17. We'll have to see. Still a long way to go to get there. But until that point in time, they don't play a single other divisional opponent. And they have a 67% win rate against non-divisional opponents since 2014. It's a third best in the league. Interestingly enough, the Carolina Panthers, who they're going to play this upcoming Thursday, have the second best record in non-divisional games since 2014. So I expect a very compelling, competitive game on Thursday night, one that is definitely going to be fun to watch in my opinion. Let's talk about the Cleveland Browns offense. This offense was actually much more successful than we've come to expect from the Browns, but it was definitely not explosive. And we're going to be talking a lot about this theme, successful versus explosive. So on early downs, and that's throughout this whole Sharp Football show, today's Sharp Football show, going to be touching on this through a variety of the different topics. On early downs in the first half, the Cleveland Browns actually had a 61% success rate, and guess what? The Kansas City Chiefs only had a 64% success rate. So extremely close from a success rate perspective. However, from an explosive play perspective, take a look down at the bottom. Kansas City, we skipped ahead one. The Cleveland Browns recorded 10 first downs. Kansas City only had 11 in the first half. So you're very close on success rate. You're very close in first downs. Yet the Cleveland Browns only averaged 5.9 yards per play, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs averaged 12 yards per play. Massive difference, over double the yards per play. A lot more explosive plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, which was able to move the ball downfield quickly for them and resulted in quicker scores, easier points to come by, even though the game was very close at half. One of the keys, I think, though, with regard to the Cleveland Browns in the second half. So in the first half, they probably only should have been down by 4 points. They tried to go for it for 2 on 2 different occasions, missed them both. The game was still within a score, but the problem in the second half was they just don't know yet who they're throwing the ball to. Look at all these players who were targeted. And typically, a team is going to trot out their top 3 wide receivers, maybe throw on a 4th, maybe sometimes a 5th, a tight end or 2, and a running back. Look at all these targets and how many players they've got. Brashad Perryman has got 4 targets. 4 targets for Perryman. The most on the entire Browns in the second half. This guy was like a newly acquired player. David Njoku also had 4. Both Antonio Callaway and running back Duke Johnson had 3. Then you got Damion Ratley, Jarvis Landry, Jontel Hilliard, Rashard Higgins, and Seth DeValve. All these guys had between 1 and 2 targets. Like, you just had too many different people running in and out of this lineup in the second half. It's very difficult for guys that aren't quite as skilled to have like solid roles when they're just cycling in throughout like this, to get the quarterback on the same timing, to know exactly what these wide receivers are doing. I think you need to have a little bit more consistency and stick with your best guys and just stick them out there and let them play, as opposed to cycling through them as quickly as this. I know a guy might get tired, need a breather, a guy might get banged up or something, but this is just kind of putting too much stress on Baker Mayfield to try to figure out like how this particular guy runs a route versus another guy. Every single player runs something a little bit differently. He's just a rookie trying to get used to these guys, and I think that's very difficult for him. Puts a lot of stress on him. Let's move on to still talking about the Browns when they started targeting their running back. So finally, we get a more intelligent play caller, aka non-Todd Haley, and Freddie Kitchens starts calling a lot of passes to the running backs, and in this case 9 targets to Duke Johnson. Now look at this, 10 of 10, 8.3 yards per attempt, and a 70% success rate. In the NFL since week 5, obviously Baker Mayfield got his first start in week 4, right? He was out in Oakland, high scoring game. His first start after that game, they averaged 7.4 yards per attempt to running backs, 9th best in the NFL. And not just that, that's better than what they averaged to their wide receivers. To wide receivers since week 5, they've averaged a 6.0 yard per attempt average. That's the worst in the NFL. Definitely significantly more effective throwing the football to their running backs, and they have a 50% success rate when they target running backs. So naturally, you would think that they should be targeting running backs more moving forward. I hope that they do that. And guess who's on deck? the Atlanta Falcons, followed by the Cincinnati Bengals. Two teams that really struggle to stop running back passes. Now, one last thing on this game, it was brutal for the Browns even in the first quarter of this game. Head coach Greg Williams deactivated Demarius Randall. I think I spelled his name wrong, but I'm sorry. And they lost two starting cornerbacks in that first half of the game. These guys both went out for injury for the rest of the game. And so they were trying to play against the best passing offense in the league without three players in their secondary. It just was not happening. So try as they might offensively, they just could not do enough to match because the Browns defense was getting picked apart. And thanks to these, losing a smattering of players in the secondary. And guess what, guys? Like, you can say one safety doesn't matter, one cornerback doesn't matter, but this is what we call cluster injuries. We're going to talk about cluster injuries momentarily. It's when you lose multiple players at the same position. Very, very difficult to overcome that when it happens in a single game or heading into like the next week's game, which we're going to talk about the Washington Redskins offensive line. All right, let's talk about the Rams and the Saints. So this was like one of the marquee games of the day. This one definitely did not fail to live up to expectations, especially with the way that the Rams came back. But what I want to first talk about is the opportunity index as it relates to this game. And this is something I started putting out 2 weeks ago. Used it again last week. And the Rams, here are the four teams which I said the rushing attacks would have a lower likelihood of exceeding expectation. We'll go through each one of these situations. But we'll first start with the Rams. And what Opportunity Index does, and I'm going to continue doing this every single week moving forward to give you guys insight into fantasy or just regular football analysis that you can use for sports betting or otherwise. Situational spots where a team has played three very easy teams, or at least easier than what they're currently going to face, a big jump in competition. And we're looking at teams that are going to a far easier schedule than what they've played, or teams that are going to a far harder schedule. And, the Rams were one of these teams that were on that list. And so let's look at what Todd Gurley did in this game. So in the prior three games, he averaged over one rushing touchdown per game, 128 rushing yards per game, and 5.7 yards per carry. In this game, only one rushing touchdown, which not so bad. 68 rushing yards, definitely about almost half of what he had been averaging per game, and 5.2 yards per carry, a little bit worse. Big thing happened here, of course, was that they got down in the second quarter, so they had to throw the ball a little bit more. But coupled with the fact that Jared Goff and the Rams were on the bye list for the passing offense, Jared Goff was absolutely able to crush this team. So when you look at the Saints defense and how they struggled, Jared Goff was 12 of 16 in the first half, 12 yards per attempt, a 50% first down rate. So half of the passes that Jared Goff threw converted into a first down. So it really makes the decision maker, the play caller, in this case Sean McVay, think, well, why am I going to throw the ball? Why am I going to run the ball? I like Todd Gurley, but we're so much more effective when we're throwing the ball. We're averaging over double the yards per play. We're getting a first down about half the time. So naturally, even if the score was probably tighter, I would think that they would still shift a little bit more towards the passing game. And that's what ultimately got them back in the game in the second half there. Now, Drew Brees. Let's talk about Drew Brees a little bit, because I wrote about him a lot in the offseason, about how his season last year was something that people should just kind of not look at cumulative stats, counting statistics, total yards, total touchdowns, things like that. Instead, look at his efficiency. And I wrote an article showing how his efficiency was actually really good. Well, look at what he did in week 7 and 8. And you can see this on here, obviously, a lot better than if I was doing the Periscope. But he did not target the deep part of the field hardly at all. Only 10% total passes, so 10% of his passes went past 15 yards in the air. Very infrequent targeting of deep passes the last couple of weeks. Now, I completely understood why they did it against the Baltimore Ravens, because they're worried about the pass rush, playing on the road, etc. But against the Minnesota Vikings, I figured with 3 starters down in the secondary that they would not throw the ball. They would throw the ball a little bit deeper down the field, try to attack that weakness. But once again, a second week in a row, Sean Payton decided we're not going to throw the ball deep here. We're going to take our chances with these shorter routes underneath. Now, he was great when he did throw the ball deep. Perfect, 119 passer rating. Every single one of his passes were complete that were thrown over 15 yards in the air. So move back to what he did in this pass game, and look at this. Look at this completion target frequency that he had down the field. 25%, up from 10% all the way to 25% of his passes went over 15 yards past the line of scrimmage. Now, he didn't have nearly the success rate, as you can see up here in the top right graphic, but he was going down the field a lot more often in Week 9 against the LA Rams, and they had a ton of success. Now, Drew Brees, what can you say? He, in the first half of this game, 17 of 22, 9.6 yards per attempt, a 68% success rate, and a 146 passer rating. That was phenomenal. The thing that I was concerned about in this game was whether or not Aaron Donald, Ndamukong Suh, up the middle would get that pressure on Drew Brees, because that's the one area that you can really get to Drew Brees. If you can pressure him up the middle, he and his stature and just the way that he throws, he's far less comfortable with that pressure coming up the middle as he is around the sides, where he can just step up into the pocket more behind the center. In this game, I thought that Aaron Donald might get a little bit of opportunity, get some pass rushes there, but Drew Brees didn't take a single sack in this game. So the offensive line did a great job. Brees did a great job of getting the ball out of his hands. Sean Payton did a great job of working in shorter passes to Alvin Kamara that had a lot of upside to him after the catch, and then also still pushing the ball a little bit down the field. So play design, play scheming, play sequencing, Sean Payton just a totally great job against the Rams. And then you look at the Saints and what they've got on deck the final 8 weeks of the season. They got the fourth easiest schedule of opposing pass defenses. Just a really nice slate of teams for Drew Brees to continue to set and continue moving up his records of passing touchdowns. I think he's going to have a very strong last 8 weeks of the season. And when Brees can get going offensively and the run game can be productive, this team's going to be hard to stop, especially when they can stop the run as good as they are able to do so far this season. All right, let's jump back and talk a little bit about this opportunity index. And I mentioned, that the LA Rams were on that list in terms of running offenses that I thought would not have the level of success that we've come to expect over the last 3 weeks. And of course, Todd Gurley did not, but it wasn't by a massive margin. It was more so just the fact that they didn't have the opportunity to run the ball enough, and in part because they were so successful passing the ball, in part was because of the scoreboard. There's a few other teams that we mentioned. The Denver Broncos were one of them. Philip Lindsay, the prior 2 games, he had 2 rushing touchdowns. He had 93 yards per game and 5.8 yards per carry. In the Week 9 game, no touchdowns, only 60 total rushing yards, and only 3.5 yards per carry. So definitely this one was one that you could say, okay, this was a clear cut. Peyton Barber and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The prior 3 games, he didn't have the rushing touchdowns. Some of you guys might have been using him in, as one of those guys to substitute out for a player who was on a bye, or you're using him in daily. But he did average 66 yards per game and 4.6 yards per carry. However, in Week 9, 31 total rushing yards, obviously no touchdowns, and 2.8 yards per carry. Now, James Conner was one. He killed it. He killed it from a total perspective. He had a receiving touchdown, I believe. He had like 60 receiving yards, something like that. But from a pure rushing perspective, definitely did not fare up to expectations as what he had done the prior 3 games, because it was absolutely absurd the prior 3 games. I mean, 2 rushing touchdowns per week and 5.7 yards per carry, 122 rushing yards a game. Here, no touchdowns on the ground, 107 rushing yards, 4.5 yards per carry. So still a great day. I mean, if you're playing season long and you have him, of course, you're going to start him. This is not like a start bench type situation here that we're discussing, but he definitely did not live up to the production from the prior 3 weeks, and that's where we're looking at from this opportunity index. Is this player going to have the opportunity to meet our expectations from what we've seen the last few weeks? And it's very kind of difficult to put both the Steelers and the Rams on there the same week with the Todd Gurley and James Conner, what they've been doing this season, but they definitely didn't have the same level of total fantasy scoring, so to speak, as they did the prior 3 weeks. Let's talk about the Falcons run defense, because this was an interesting game here. So the Atlanta Falcons 100% sold out to stop the run, and they basically forced Alex Smith to win this game for the Washington Redskins. And guess what? That's a great game plan. That's a game plan that other teams should use against the Redskins moving forward, because of how Adrian Peterson-centric this offense has been. And Alex Smith on early downs, I mean, he is not comfortable in Washington right now. He's not been the right type of player to have success. On early downs, only 19 of 33, 5.8 yards per pass attempt, a 46% success rate, and only a 72 passer rating. Adrian Peterson in last week's game, and actually like almost every other game he seems to do this, he ran for more yards per carry than Alex Smith averaged on yards per pass attempt on early downs. He averaged 5.9 yards per carry last week and a 52% success rate on early downs. Here, Alex Smith was worse passing the ball from a yards per play and worse from a success rate. So it's obviously not going to get it done when a running back the prior week is turning in great numbers, and then the quarterback the next week can't even match what the running back was doing. And then the running back's absolutely doing nothing in that game too, and you're trying to live and die by what Alex Smith is doing, and that's the production he's giving you. It's not going to give you the chance to win that game. Now, I was definitely surprised at the fact that Adrian Peterson could not get going, but I do think that that's a great game plan that the Atlanta Falcons, offered in this game, and to do that on the road, I thought was extra impressive. But the Redskins, here's back to the cluster injuries. They were down one starter to start the game, right? Their left tackle was out, Trent Williams. During the course of this game, they lost 3 more starters along the offensive line. Very difficult to overcome. It's hard enough to take one of your best offensive linemen at left tackle and play a game without him. But to lose 3 other starters that are starting that game is very difficult to overcome. Some of these guys might be out long term. Trent Williams definitely is, and 2 of the other guys may be out long term. That's cluster injuries. That's the very definition of that. And the run defenses that the Redskins face, remember, they're a run-centric offense that wants to get Adrian Peterson going. They play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Houston Texans, and the Dallas Cowboys. 3 teams that rank top half of the league, 2 teams that rank top 5. It's going to be very challenging for the Redskins. One of the most impressive turnarounds, I think, that we've seen this season that we're going to continue to talk about, because we got some numbers from Sharp Football Stats, what the Falcons have done in the red zone. So 2017, they only had a 39% success rate when they passed the ball in the red zone. Something they definitely needed to work on coming into this season. It was really like a mandate that Steve Sarkisian improve that. They did have a 51% success rate when they ran the ball, but that's still not all that great. Week 1, horrific numbers. We ripped them a ton. They had a 9% success rate when they passed the ball and a 40% success rate when they ran the ball. Terrible numbers. However, this team, starting a little bit after week 1 into week 2, then boom, starting week 3, they have the most successful pass offense in the NFL in terms of when they pass the ball in the red zone, the 63% success rate, best in the NFL. Since week 4, the very next week, if we look at week 4 onward, they're the number 1 most successful rushing team in the red zone. 67% of their plays grade out as successful. So I'm extremely impressed by the turnaround that Steve Sarkisian has implemented. The more intelligent play calling that he's used in the red zone has really made a big difference for the Atlanta Falcons, and I'm excited to see what they can do now that they came off their bye, got a big win in DC, and now are going to continue with the rest of their season. All right, I mentioned that I wanted to talk about success versus explosion. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I want to talk about that as it relates to the Chargers-Seahawks game. And in addition, then talk about it in general over the course of the league. So, Chargers versus the Seahawks. In the first half of this game, the Seahawks dominated from a success rate perspective. They had a 60% success rate. However, they only averaged 5.5 yards per play. Now, the Chargers, a 48% success rate, so the Seahawks were far more successful in what they were able to do. But the Chargers averaged 10 yards per play, nearly double what the Seahawks did. And we talked about that in a similar situation. We talked about the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland and the Kansas City Chiefs. Cleveland very successful, almost as successful as the Chiefs, almost the same number of first downs in the first half, but so many more yards per play due to more explosive plays. The Seahawks just couldn't generate explosive plays. So let's just keep going here. In the second half, they needed to start getting explosive plays. They're down by 9 points at halftime. Neither team scores in the third quarter, so they're still trailing by 9 entering the fourth quarter when Russell Wilson, driving to bring this game within one score, throws a pick six. Obviously terrible for Seahawks backers. But in that second half, the Seahawks only 3.5 yards per pass attempt and a 24% success rate. So take a look at their success rate. The Chargers and the Seahawks, both those defenses, made some adjustments at halftime, got a lot better in the second half. And so the success of the Seahawks got whittled away thanks to some changes that the Chargers defense had implemented. However, what Seattle needed to do was not just slowly continue to be successful and move the ball down the field when you're trailing by 2 scores, and then more than that, they needed to be explosive. And in that entire second half, there wasn't a single pass play that generated an explosive gain, by definition 20-plus yards. Not a single pass play from Russell Wilson. In the fourth quarter, there were 6 running back rushes. Only 6 running back rushes from the Seattle Seahawks. Those runs only averaged 3.5 yards per carry. They called 21 passes, right? And look at what happened on these passes. 4.3 yards per attempt, 0 explosive passes, 2 sacks, and a pick six. And the fact that they were even in the position to send that game into overtime at the end was pretty much a surprise, considering the fact that you saw them down, needing to come back. They were trying to basically score 15 points in that fourth quarter. A touchdown, they kicked the extra point, then they needed another touchdown and a 2-point conversion. And these passing numbers are just not what's going to get you back in that game quickly enough. So I was actually surprised that they were even in that position to do that. But the next 3 weeks, the reason why I bring it up, look at the schedule the next 3 weeks. They play the Rams, the Packers, and the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers aren't explosive. The Packers are midway. The Rams obviously are. But forget the explosiveness. Those 3 teams can score points. In order for the Seahawks to keep pace, they need to do more than just be successful. They need to do more than just run the ball and have a decent running attack that's gaining decent yards per carry. They need to also figure out a way to move the ball down the field. So its success rate's very important, but it's not going to help you if you happen to get in a deficit, or it's not going to help you when you're playing a really high-scoring offense. You're going to need some explosive plays so that you can bypass 30 yards at once. So you don't have to convert first downs on those, 3 different first downs. You just get that big chunk play. You just need to hit that one. So let's look around the league a little bit. And this is just looking at week 9, okay, this past week. On the left, you see the most explosive passing attacks. Kansas City, San Francisco, Atlanta, the Rams, and the Chargers. The Rams are the only team that lost that game. But look at how that explosive passing offense from those teams helped them win those games. Now, the most successful passing attacks. So explosive versus successful. Explosive, we're looking at pass plays that gain 20-plus yards. What is the rate when you throw the ball that your passing attempt, that you're gaining 20 or more yards? How often is a pass play generating that? That's explosive. I don't care if it's a 20-yard pass down the field, a 50-yard pass down the field, or a 15-yard pass where the guy runs the ball for 20 yards after he catches it. Those are all explosive gains from the pass. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about explosive plays. We're talking about success rate. That's when we're talking about, are you staying on schedule or ahead of schedule so that you can keep yourself in manageable situations. Obviously, you can bypass, you can gain 10 yards that's on a pass play. That's going to put you in a good situation. That's still considered a successful play. So you don't get penalized from a success rate perspective for being overly successful, gaining more yards than you need. But are you sure that you're not falling short on a per play basis? So all 5 of these teams that were very successful in terms of their passing, and why do we talk passing? Because passing is more correlated to wins than is rushing. And these 5 teams were all the most successful, and they also had wins, every single one of them. And look, we've got 2 of the top 2 teams on here were both explosive and successful. Next slide, we're going to look at the worst teams, the worst offenders. And as you can see here, every single one of these teams that's in yellow lost their game. But let's start with the explosive plays. Again, the Detroit Lions and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Detroit couldn't do anything behind that offensive line. Pittsburgh, they were one of the 2 teams that won the game despite not having many explosive gains last week. And one of the reasons is I think they actually kind of took a page out of Sean Payton's playbook when Sean Payton went into play the Baltimore Ravens. A lot of short stuff, a lot of short passes, a lot of run plays, and basically just not making mistakes and moving the ball down the field. And that's exactly what the Steelers did. They didn't need to gain all these explosive plays, putting Ben Roethlisberger at risk. That's definitely going to change. When you go on the road and play the Ravens in their house, you're happy if you can win the game 13-10, right? Like, nothing is guaranteed in Baltimore. They're a really good team with a really good defense. You just need to walk away with a win. And by the way, Ravens fans, like, I personally think it would be ridiculous to fire John Harbaugh. This guy, like, granted, he's not the most innovative in the NFL, but he does a great job. And I've been always impressed by what his team is capable of doing when they have to go play some big games. They come into Pittsburgh, they win there. They've gone up to New England. They play the Patriots as good as any other team in the league. Those are 2 of the best teams. I understand they're not winning all their games, but guess who your quarterback is? I mean, look, Lamar Jackson may not be ready to play quarterback, but I think we know that Joe Flacco is not worth the amount of money that he's making. That really hamstrings a team when they're paying Flacco as much as they are. And I think it's admirable that this team has been able to do so much despite Joe Flacco playing like he has and taking up as much salary as he has. And that's thanks to some of the other moves that Ozzie Newsome has done and some of the coaching that John Harbaugh has been able to do. But by no means is this the fault that Joe Flacco is missing wide open guys in the end zone, John Harbaugh's fault. So I personally thought that the discussion about getting rid of John Harbaugh was ridiculous. I don't know who you would bring in at this point that would do a better job for you, and then you have to look at who's even available for next year to do a better job for you. Getting back to the explosive, least explosive passing attacks, the Bills, no surprise there. Cleveland, we already talked about them earlier, and then the Saints. But the Saints got up early. They threw the ball a lot down the field. Right? They did it a lot more, 25% versus 10% in the prior couple of weeks, but they were not generating explosive gains there. So they had more attempts, not quite as effective, but at least they were stretching out the defense, testing the defense, and they did hit on a few of them. Least successful passing attacks. As you can see, it's very hard to overcome poor success when you throw the football. Oakland, the Jets, the Bills, the Seahawks, and the Ravens. All these teams, poor success when they pass the ball. Every single one of these teams lost their game. Most of them lost by double digits. So not ideal there. Let's talk real quick before we bring in Evan Silva about some surprises. I thought surprise number 1, Sam Darnold. Like, I figured he had a lot of things working in his favor. He's playing the Miami Dolphins, who don't have a great pass defense, who don't have a great pass rush. And in that game, only 5.9 yards per attempt. He takes 4 sacks. He throws 4 interceptions, and he posts a 32 passer rating. A lot of this was on Sam Darnold and his decision-making, his accuracy, some of the things that he was doing in the pocket, right? Not very good. Some of it was on the offensive line. Like, these guys could not get any protection against the Dolphins. I was pretty surprised. I was very surprised that they couldn't get any pass protection. I actually thought this game was capable of going over the 41-point total that it got bet down to. It opened at 45, got bet down to 41. I took the over at 41. It got all the way up to 43.5. That's where it closed. Now, to keep things in perspective, 2 of the most key numbers in the NFL right now are 43, 41, and of course 44. and then we working into some little bit higher numbers. Now the scoring is up, and so it's a big deal when a line moves from 45 down to 41. This is a lot of under money. Part of the reason it jumped even further on Saturday night was talks that the field was going to be a disaster. The field ended up, I was really in disbelief that the grounds crew got that field in such good condition. It might not have looked perfect, but if you had seen the amount of rain that was on that field during that Miami Hurricanes game, you would not have believed that that field would have been in as good shape as it was, less than 24 hours later. It was in great condition. That is not why this game went under. The game went under because the offensive lines couldn't protect and the quarterbacks played poorly. The Jets, another reason why they couldn't do anything offensively, 9.8 yards to go on third down. I mean, how are you going to have success with a rookie quarterback on the road when you're averaging 9.8 yards to go on third down? Just a terrible situation. Another bad is Matthew Stafford. His pass protection was horrendous. I really will have to watch the film more on this game to figure out where the blame lies, but he took 10 sacks. They had no explosive passes. They were 8 of 11 on first down. High completion rate, but look at this yards per attempt, 3.7 yards per attempt. That's not going to win you any games. And they had just one pass to a wide receiver on first down. One. They were mainly throwing the ball to their running backs on first down. That was basically their game plan, was throw the ball to the running backs on first down when they couldn't have success running the football, and it just did not work out for them. I'm in favor of throwing the ball to the running backs, but the problem is that, number one, when you do it too much, you become predictable, and I think like I said here, of the 11 passes, only one went to a wide receiver. So the majority of them, I think a couple went to the tight end. The rest went to running backs. So that's number one. Number two, the reason these weren't like, hey, we're definitely going to work some running back passes in here because we think the defense is susceptible. The reason was our quarterback's getting pressured too quickly. So we just got to figure out ways to get the ball out quicker. Hey, let's start throwing the ball to the running backs. And of course, Mike Zimmer adjusted to that and was taking these guys down for very little gain. A good surprise, let's talk about something good, in that same game was Dalvin Cook. He had 8.9 yards per carry, but here's the catch. For all you Dalvin Cook fans thinking he's back, he was back, but I will tell you, only a 40% success rate. So he had a couple explosive gains, but only a 40% success rate, and that was against the number 30 run defense. Over the next month, Dalvin Cook has to play the number 3 Chicago Bears, the number 6 Seattle Seahawks, and the number 9 New England Patriots. 3 very difficult top 10 run defenses. He just played the number 30 run defense and had a 40% success rate. So I envision that it's going to take a little while. I mean, he's on the snap count. He's going to work himself back in. I love Dalvin Cook as a player. I'm really glad for the league that he's back and playing. I'm looking forward to see what he does moving forward. I'm just letting you guys know that from a strength of schedule perspective, he will be facing some very difficult run defenses moving forward. All right, guys, we were trying to get Evan Silva on here, but we were unable to do so, get the schedule synced up with me recording this a little bit later than normal and doing it on YouTube, obviously, this week because we were able to record it here during the football game on Monday Night Football and get more views on it after this. Hopefully, we will be back on Periscope next week. However, we are investigating trying to just do it on YouTube Live so that we can have it uploaded on YouTube automatically, and I don't have to go through the process in the evening to do that. So feel free to share whether or not you like this in YouTube or in Periscope. But at any rate, hopefully you guys enjoyed the show tonight. Hopefully I and you guys have better success next week with your daily fantasy, with your regular sports betting. Hopefully, the results can't get any worse than they were this week for me, so I know that that's going to be a positive. But with that said, one of the things I want you guys to be looking for is the difference between successful offenses and explosive offenses, and when you can pinpoint if a team's going to be successful from a passing perspective, and whether or not they can also have the potential for explosive performances. You don't have to be a great team, but as the San Francisco 49ers were able to find, if you get the right opponent or you're the right offense, those are opportunities. And so you have to look at the schedule, try to pinpoint those down. And when you are, you're going to have a lot of success on the season. So, or in that particular game, rather. So with that said, hopefully we will be seeing you guys on Friday for the Sharp Football Analysis podcast that I record with Evan and Dr. Chow. That'll be out overnight on Friday. It's now right around midnight on Monday. I'm going to try to turn this around and get it up there as quickly as possible. And then I've got a report due at noon tomorrow that I will be not sleeping between now and then. But that's what it's like during football season. So looking forward to seeing you guys at the Sharp Football podcast. Looking forward to being back with you next week, hopefully on time at 7:30 Eastern on Monday night. And until then, good luck with all your research. SharpFootballStats.com has been updated. I've got all the latest visualizations up there with all the data up through the Sunday Night Football game. So you can look at the advanced box scores. You can look at all the other tools that are up there. The only thing that I don't have up there yet, which I will by Tuesday afternoon, will be the personnel groupings. But everything else is up there. With that said, guys, good luck this week, and we'll talk to you soon.